Mr. Speaker, we regret the notion that people often associate high culture with the way it has been phrased. Because the term itself has been rather condescending in the first place. People believe that, and we acknowledge, and people often believe that high culture often refers to some forms of art house culture, which often draws from a mostly Western canon. But we'll be happy on the side of OG to open up this to niche canons. So we'll see that each country will be able to promote their own culture. Japan will be promoting their own kabuki dance, and Korea will be promoting their own sort of Shila dance. So we think in the alternative, we ought to consider what mass culture is. Mass culture often is one with an ample viewership, and with an ample financial backing, and is often popular to begin with. It's predominantly controlled by an almost certainly Western canon or big corporations. Certainly you see things like Korean dramas here and there, but this fall in the minimum. So we think on the contrast, high culture tends to be more niche, tends to be more dated, and it tends to push on the boundaries of what we think is art and what we think is the sum of all human experiences combined. But we think that while it's no less valid, it's difficult for high culture to survive because it just for some historical failures or otherwise, it just doesn't have its ability to become financially sustainable. It means firstly being able to project yourself to a large group of people where you ordinarily can't do it, and it also requires a lot of training where popular culture is able to do so much more better than they are in the first place. So what we're happy to do in our debate today, we're happy to set a quota of around 50% of airtime on television shows to culture. And if not, we'll cut the licenses for these television programs to broadcast on TV. Of course, we think that mass culture can still be consumed on YouTube, but the point is this: we want to encourage people to consume more forms of high culture, and we think that this is the best means for ensuring that the art scene will be diversified in the future. 3 questions I'll be talking about in my speech today. First, what is objective value in high culture even if people don't like it? Second, why the state has viewed the individual in these cases above and all other means? And third, why we bring more good than harm to the creative scene, why we bring more good to the creative scene in our policy. First question, why there's an objective value in high culture even if people don't like it? We think there's a value when we do things like offering literature in schools, even if schools don't popularize it. We think there's a value in being able to draw to our own past, because it's the historical basis of how things to be. And it's upon this cultural repository that you are able to ensure and identify your own human heritage, not just how things are, but how things came to be, and that's part of your own human actualization. We believe in the modern context, we allow people to recognize that you are able to engage in people, with conversations with other people on no basis of language, race, or religion, or gender, ultimately because we feel that each other person has an inherent value worth discussing with. So we think that to the extent that we want other people to be able to freely engage with others, we ought to ensure that you are able to freely engage with the past. So we think the value of high culture is this: you ensure that when you have airtime, this high culture groups are able to remain sustainably viable, and this prevents these people from dying out. It prevents people from not taking learning unique musical instruments, ultimately because they feel that there is no inherent value in doing it anymore, or taking on certain kinds of crafts like katana making, because this is considered to be lowbrow and not sustainable. So we think that ultimately, if you don't voice this sort of culture and you don't bring it to the limelight and you don't have the financial largesse to ensure that it survives, this high culture will eventually die out, and this cultural groups will die, and you are essentially creating some sort of cultural void in the world where one used to exist, and one where you know used to exist because you know you have a history, but you are now unable to access it anymore. Second question, why the state has a duty to intervene, and why museums in these instances are not enough? No thank you, sir. We think that we have an incentive to ensure a burgeoning art scene in every country. We think that museums are awash because no one goes there anymore, and it's paper for us to discuss it in those cases. We think that the notice of high art is important because for the state, because it tends to link to the ideas of civil society, because high art forms tend to engage with certain things like critical discourse, the ability for you to engage with certain countries, to engage with certain ideas, like how Tchaikovsky used opera, even in the 18th century, to engage with certain things like how the Russian government was doing at certain times. they are able to tie the professionalism in their strict learning with the thoroughness and the ability to criticize issues in a way that mass culture people like Katy Perry are often unable to do so. We think that's better on our side, and we want to preserve that sort of thing and ensure that there's enough airtime. No thank you, sir. So we think that the states want to hold critical mirror to itself to be able to ensure that people are able to engage with the state. It's important. We think there's a problem when people are not voting in American society, ultimately because they don't think they're empowered with the moral agency to vote. And we think that we increase that on our side if we are able to allow them to believe that they're able to think in a manner that these artists are able to think, more than just consuming things like Nicki Minaj. So let's contrast that with mass culture. Yes, clothing.
All of these benefits are great. What you need to tell me is that why putting them on primetime TV will create these benefits.
We think that primetime TV is a good in itself because people tend to consume it already. Because people are not, because it's a lot easier to access than perhaps going to a theater to watch opera and the likes of that. But we put to you that even more people are drawn away from the television and want to go on YouTube right now. We think there's a higher chance that people will watch these sorts of art forms, and there's a higher chance, and there's higher marginal benefit in your ability for these art forms to survive in the first place. Let's talk a bit about mass culture, and that there's a lot of private investment in the first place. We don't think that to the extent that big conglomerates like Disney, which are incredibly money, are able to pump in money into those areas, you necessarily need to ensure that they are able to survive in the long run, that you as a state are able to pump in money into those avenues. We think that state money is meant to plug the gaps in funding, not to duplicate the private sector, so we don't think it's necessary for us to pump money into the private sector, to pump money into things like Katy Perry. Last question, why we do more good than harm to the creative scene. We think it's important for us to ensure that there's a diversity of culture within those countries and that people stop consuming things that belong to Western canon, that belong to a canon that belongs to Disney Incorporated in those instances. We think that ultimately speaking, the more you're able to value high culture and the more specifically you can cater to the local artists, to the local forms of art, you're able to create a more cultural discourse. Why is this good? Firstly, you're improving the likelihood of tourism that happens in those areas because you're not able to allow local artists to be able to engage in the way that has not been able to engage before. We say that now every country will incentive to grow their own art scenes and to distinguish themselves as unique. Japan with its kabuki dance. Zimbabwe with their own interpretive cultural dances. We think that's good for society. We propose.
Alright, thank the Prime Minister to respond to inviting leader of the office.
I think what's most condescending about opening government's case is the fact that they think people aren't able to decide by themselves what cultural values are important to them. They think that only when culture educates, only when culture is accessible to the high-minded, that's when it's important for us to protect. But we think the other condescending notion that they have to prove in this debate is that they think mainstream culture does not create any form of relatability or reflection upon the past. That mainstream culture is all trashy. Mainstream culture is all about mindlessness. I'm going to prove to you two things in regards to that. That one, it doesn't matter if it's mindlessness. Secondly, that not only is our side actually not mindless when we propagate mainstream art, but we're the ones that create the more democratized version of art that reflects the people's values. But before I move on towards these things, a few clarifications I feel need to be made in terms of direct rebuttals. Firstly, they said that look, we don't want cultures to die out. I don't think side opening opposition has the onus to say that we are going to kill off Shakespeare, that we're going to kill off Tchaikovsky. We think these things can still exist within the educational framework in which people are taught these things at the end of the day. What they have to prove to us is why exactly must it flood the channels in which people choose what they themselves want to watch and what they themselves enjoy at the end of the day. But secondly, we feel that all these notions of things like tourism and benefits, all these things, can still be improved in our side. We don't think tourism is an exclusive benefit towards things like the high art. But thirdly, if you want engagements by local artists, we think that also happens under our side. The only difference is that this local artist then would have to compete with an environment of other mainstream crafts as well, which is good because that means they make that art relatable to individuals as opposed to preserving some kind of high notion of what they themselves think is important, something they don't show any normative value of in this debate. I'll integrate the rest of my rebuttals in my questions. Firstly, why exactly the subjectivity of art, why governments should not intervene in that particular facet? Firstly, it's because we believe governments are not the best actors to decide what's good for people because art is so subjective at the end of the day. It is up to your own personal experience to determine what art you should value, right? Because these things are determined perfectly by corporations as well. Because they think corporations are undemocratic. We think corporations are actually pretty democratic considering that the way in which they cater their programs are based on what people want, right? For example, the fact that some things are more popular than the other is because of things like Nielsen rating. Because of the fact that some TV shows make more money than others. But secondly, we think social media also ensures that the popularity and demand is diverse. It's not only concluded towards some majority within a democracy, but also within the minorities as well who voice out their concerns within the social media. These things can be reflected by those things at the end of the day, but what government is doing is that they assume a particular form of things is more important than the other. That's why we should be pushing it into the form of a quota at the end of the day. But secondly, we think governments only have the duty to intervene within art when it actually brings harm upon people. Let's say, for example, we prevent pornography from being shown in public because minors might be influenced by it, or we don't prevent things like people smoking and all these depictions of art. Right? All things are okay. There is no objective harm. What happens when we remove high art from that picture? So we don't think the government has an urgent onus in order to take up this particular notion at the end of the day. So all these things shows that there is subjectivity of the art. Because of the subjectivity of the art, governments do not have the capacity to determine what's important for people at the end of the day. But secondly, they said, but look, what happens if this art dies out? I'm going to talk about two scenarios. Firstly, we don't think this art will die out, right? We think this art will still be preserved within intellectual environments which people can get into at the end of the day. Environments that are much more important and much better because at least this environment is academic, which people talk about it anyway. This environment is absorbing my art, this high art blindly from TV which they watch, and they put their own wrong interpretations upon Tchaikovsky, as opposed to an educated interpretation of Tchaikovsky that's actually being taught in things like opera theatres or musical theatres or educational schools. These things can happen better on our side at the end of the day. But secondly, we don't even care if high art dies. We think art evolves according to cultural demands, and art is based on what people deem is functional, what people deem is truthful at the end of the day. Things like language which protect, which people still speak and talk about, can still protect our side. We love cultural preservation, but we don't think popular art should be determined by some elitist notion or a government say that's not democratic upon deciding what is more important for you. If kabuki art is deemed by Japanese people as still functional, then preserve it. It still become popular at the end of the day. It still be niche mass, right? But if it's not, why do you force people to believe that this is still functional for your particular culture? I live in an environment in Malaysia where people tell me that Malay language should be protected, but they never tell me why it's functional in the society. That's really annoying at the end of the day. I think I should be able to decide that no, I don't think Malay. If Malay genres cannot compete with Western movies, why should we preserve sucking movies at the end of the day and not allow for better one movies to come in? But the competition upon what culture creates is much better because people don't live in a vacuum in which they believe I represent my people when they don't, because people don't like to watch your art at the end of the day, right? But secondly, I want to talk about the importance of mainstream art. Firstly, we don't care if it's mindless. Why? Because the reason why we don't care if it's mindless is because people go to school and have themselves educated by high art already. We learn about Shakespeare, we learn about Turner, all these things happen already. So when they go back home, they want to relax and unwind. Primetime TV helps them, give them that instant form of relaxation and gratification in which they want, in which they need. You have to tell us why that form of self-actualization is not important or any less or any more inferior to other forms of actualization at the end of the day, right? But secondly, I don't believe mainstream art is all mindless. In fact, a lot of mainstream art relates to current events. Like, for example, even the creation of superhero movies talk about civil wars. Like, talk about the difference of identities between people. Between people like Jessica Jones, even superhero movies are not absolutely mindless. We don't think about utilitarian benefits, whether morals should be Kantian or morals should be utilitarian. Even when they watch things like superhero movies at the end of the day, these things happen anyway, right? But thirdly, what happens is that we think mainstream art is important because mainstream art also happens to be very anti-establishment, but something that can create popularity the moment they are deemed relatable to people. Case in point, hip hop, right? Before I move on to talk about hip hop, just closing.
What do you expect is the exact reason why highbrow is not popular?
The exact reason why highbrow is not popular is because people don't like it, right? People don't want to absorb it. For the individuals who want to absorb it, they can choose to do so. I'll talk about it later. But hip-hop is an important example, right? Because hip-hop is very anti-establishment, and goes against very traditionalist notions of what art is. This is what high art is most often based upon, right? All these elitist people who fund all their private donations towards these individuals, right? What happens when hip-hop has to compete with high culture, you create a stratification of the particular culture that might make much more obvious when they're shown in the same channels, right? This is high art, this is lowbrow art at the end of the day. But thirdly, why exactly is it harmful for you to force these things to be destroyed? First is because when you do it, then you destroy these corporations to be able to cater and make profits at the end of the day. Why is it important? Because when corporations have a lot of money, that's when they're able to increase our markets and increase our profits to also create specialty channels for arthouse films, with various art films which you talk about. But this is good because at least it evolves organically because of people demands, as opposed to when government imposes it upon you. But secondly, even if people do end up watching it, they're imposed by it. So what they do is that they hate it, but it's mandated by the state. So they just leave it as background noise at the end of the day when they listen to Bach or Tchaikovsky. Not something they should appreciate. When people want to appreciate art, it should be a journey for them, especially high art, because it's complicated, not something that is mandated upon them. All these reasons I'm proud to oppose.
Right, thank you, speakers. I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
Zim horribly missed the boat. We are not banning mainstream culture. If you want to go back and relax, there's always YouTube, Spotify, and YouTube channels. We are not saying that mainstream culture cannot create discourse. We are saying that highbrow culture tends to be possessed of a different spine. It tends to be more culturally diverse. It tends to take into account the subordinate narratives more. It tends to have deeper roots in history. Our role as opening government and closing presumably is to ensure a breadth of options so the system becomes a lot more diverse rather than people having to watch you whip and name it. I've got four extensions today. Number one, how do we ensure the survivability of highbrow art? Number two, does the government have capacity to decide? Number three, is people's liking the only determinant of artistic value? And I think I'll boil the other two down into how we bring balance to the white-dominated discourse of high art currently now. Now, first extension, that of whether art will survive in schools and the opportunity they give us is that, oh, we can teach it in schools in an academic setting. Here's the thing, if you do that, people will see highbrow art as nothing but a dead language or historical artifact. The kind of engagement you get with high art, culture and ballet, if it is on mainstream television, is that of live critics, instead of people reviewing it. Otherwise, if you consign it to the self-fulfilling prophecy of a museum, it becomes an academic elite wank fest. In that particular case, Mr. Speaker, you are tarring high art with the unfair elitist notion that can only be accessed by people who go to school or go to university. That is unfair to art and unfair to the narrative. The second thing that in the advance of opening up is that local artists can still compete. Guess what? These art forms, if you have to compete for private funding, tend to sell out to the mass. This means they unfairly undermine their own art form. For example, Chinese Getai tends to start using white males instead of actual, yellow actors in that kind of view because they feel the need to appeal to a larger audience. This is the concrete trade-off between the purity of the art form and the popularity of it. Imagine all your art forms having whitewashed actors in the Kung Fu Kid fight. That's pretty awful, okay? No. Now, second extension, that on government have no capacity to decide and primetime TV should be left to its own devices, something because probably going to run. But at the point that we think in states that states license television programs to operate. This means in principle, states can and do control what companies do in their private domain. When we acknowledge that the government already places a lot of value judgments on things which are considered personal, like whether you should vaccinate yourself, what kind of literature is considered canon by the state, we do think the government has some capacity to decide in favor of growing its cultural art scene, something which Colin brought up and they never tackled. But the third thing that Zim tells us, and probably the meat of their analysis to give them credit, is that the primetime TV and presumably the state should tailor to what people want, and the high art should die if it really needs to. Please listen very carefully. There are some things called market failures. when you are assuming that just because people like something, that they necessarily give money to it. That's not really true. And you're assuming that all forms of art have the same startup entry cost. Colin already gave you this opening that a lot of highbrow art has extremely high startup costs in terms of the training required, in terms of the viewership required, in terms of the art form. This means that even if people in society, and believe me, there are people like Ashish who likes classical music and will shout out a ton to write his own sonatas on it, this means that if the startup cost and guaranteed viewership is not there, if the airtime is not there, people won't find it worthwhile to enter the industry. It is because of market failures and Colin's analysis that state funding should be used to plug gaps, not duplicate the private sector, that we believe in this case this is a better use of state control of airtime so that everyone gets their choices, not just the people who like to see watching Keith Ferry ride on a giant inflatable rocket. Yes, Dave.
Even if the market sometimes fails, it doesn't automatically mean the state is still better at deciding what people want.
We think that the state generally, in terms of culture, is better able to take into account larger perspectives. For example, their national arts councils, their independent advisories, which means that the state oftentimes tries to develop. And even if they argue the state might unfairly censor and call it a kind of like state-sanctioned form of propagandist art, we also do think that is where people can still opt out and go to YouTube if they need to in the absolute worst case. But we do think that objectively the state is much more likely to exhale on the side of caution. When Colin gave you analysis already, the highbrow art tends to be very interrelated with critics of the state, with art forms that are considered, not popular because people don't care just about profit, but they care about pushing the boundaries of expression, pushing the consciousness of expression in society. This means that of all the art forms likely to form propaganda, this is probably the last one. This is an allegory as to why the state currently funds SMEs and clean energy. Even if people don't buy goods from them, even if they don't tend to survive, even if they're less viable than MNCs. Because there are objective goods that the state can prioritize, like diversity, like innovation, even if people are not willing to put their money behind it. And the argument that Zim gives us is that people will watch this TV and hate it because they're denied the Katy Perry. Come on now. People don't watch ballet and suddenly think this is a misallocation of resources. They watch it and think at best, okay, this is kind of weird, I'm not watching it, I'm turning on my Spotify. Or at worst, they're like, hey, maybe this is not bad, maybe this is something I didn't see before. So the crucial comparative on the other side is that our world gives you a higher chance that people may appreciate high art and engage with it versus their side where everyone is not going to be influenced by the cultural flood of the media right now and never engage with it. But my last extension is that of how we bring balance to the white-dominated discourse. Colin touched on this before, I'm going to further push it. Because high culture, as you understand it now, is a pejorative that's typically associated with the white renaissance, like, arty-farty French films, ballets, and things which are considered part of the neo-Greco-Roman romantic era. How then do we improve diversity and to give voice to less known art forms like Japanese kabuki, Shilla interpretive dance, and the Navajo like blanket weaving and like teepee dances? We think that pop culture currently is profit motivated and tends to crowd out airwaves, Mr. Speaker. This means that things like Taylor Swift 1989, as awesome as that is, tend to drown out everything else, even on NHK, even on KBS. Because even in the best case, when KBS tries to promote its own culture, they become westernized versions where SNLT goes Oppa Saranghae, which is kind of cool as it is, but it's hardly representative of the entire zeitgeist of Korean culture. I know the other two judges are loving this. So what we want to argue is that if you force KBS to add 50% of Korean art forms on mainstream television, this changes the way TV stations compete. Because now they're no longer forced to race to the bottom to ensure they got lots of dancing girls on stage singing cute songs and going like that. But we do think that there's a higher chance to now compete on uniqueness, about reaching out, showing this is what Korean culture is like, this is how we are as a people. This means that in the comparative, you're giving more voice to the subaltern, more voice to others that were discouraged. Because bear in mind, KBS and NHK are globally competitive stations. This is the only chance you'll get that these art forms get to cross the borders to audiences in Singapore, in Malaysia, in America, and that's where you give kabuki, Shilla dances a voice and a chance to contest the traditional Western Renaissance canon. For all these reasons, for bringing diversity and bringing cultural awareness, we are immensely proud to propose.
Right? Take a few years and I recognize the left ear the opposite.
here, we acknowledge a lot of the benefits that high art actually produces. The problem with side opening government is the fact that they simply fail to recognize that people just don't relate to high art the same way they used to. The government has been trying for years to actually supplement high art. And we think that that has done enough to preserve it in its current state. But the problem is that it's not evolved enough to keep up with people's current demands of entertainment. And given that entertainment is subjective, and that people can make their own decisions about what does and what does not entertain them, we don't think it's the government's role to shove down a particular form of information down their throats and say, this is good for you, when it is objectively not necessarily so, because entertainment is a subjective matter. So a couple of responses before I talk to you about three main things in my speech. One, two main things in my speech. One, what is the nature of primetime TV anyways, and why you won't really achieve all the benefits you necessarily want? And secondly, how you actually harm the propagation of highbrow art to people when they're necessarily turned off by it, when you force it down their throats, and how you harm local actors and local creators as well. Before that, a couple of rebuttals. They tell us, well look, the state's role, it must be to provide a fair market. And we agree, the state's role is only to provide the opportunity for everyone to compete. The state's role is not to say, well there's not enough of this in the market right now, therefore we should provide it, given that everyone has the ample opportunity to choose it if they so desire. Right. What does this mean with regards to this debate? People can access highbrow art through specialty channels, for example. It is also on YouTube, guys, and you can also watch as well. A lot of the ballets and operas that many cities have are funded by these state governments as well to offer accessibility to everyone and lower ticket pricing, for example. In fact, the state opera house is often purely funded by many cities because they recognize the value of that. The fact that people don't want to go to those state operas is not the fault of anyone, merely the fact that they don't want to necessarily relate to it. So we don't think that's necessarily harmful on your side of the day. If people wanted highbrow, it can compete. The fact that it can't compete right now is the fact that it has refused to change and that it is dated. That brings me to my second point. Why they wanted to say, they told us eloquently from the Prime Minister's speech that highbrow art tends to glorify the history and culture and the sources from which we came from. The very problem with that is that it is static and it has not been changing. To the extent it has been changing, it has been accepted within mainstream media. That's why we have on TV, you see the classical like the Nutcracker, for example, being shown on TV because of the fact that people can relate to it when you see different and new versions of it. I'll talk about later on how we increase competition and improve highbrow art, but at the very end of the day, competition exists, but the fact that people don't like your particular form of highbrow art does not mean you just shove it down people's throats. Secondly, they want to tell us, well, it won't necessarily survive. Well, let's just get into the argument then, because the rest of it is integrated. What is the nature of primetime television? Primetime television is those peak hours when people come home from work, when they come home from school after a long day, they want to relax and unwind. They don't use it for necessary intellectual stimulation about the critical discourse about past histories that do not relate to them at all. We think what people want to watch when they go is not necessarily on the other spectrum, not just Nicki Minaj and how to nay. We think what people necessarily want to watch are a variety of things that show on primetime TV. We're talking about, obviously, we're talking about things such as The Daily Show. We're talking about things such as primetime news channels, for example, where they found out about the local discourse and the things that's going on in their country now. Even to the extent they watch superhero movies, for example, and superhero TV shows, it means they're absorbing that critical discourse that you want, which you say is the benefit of highbrow art, but through a means that is actually accessible to them. That comparison was never made in their side when they asserted that everyone can achieve, the political discourse and the critique that people get from watching opera, watching these forms of opera. The problem with that is that people no longer absorb opera the same way they used to. Back when there was no mass media, when there wasn't a very strong news channel to deliver information of what's going on today, that is how critical discourse happened. But that's certainly not how it happens today. People don't go to opera and learn about the debate between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. People go to the opera at the point when they want to have a nice night out on the town, and that's all. So we don't think that critical discourse happens on your side. We think, in fact, it better happens on our side of the debate. Go ahead, Chloe.
So if modern media outlets can make movies such as Shakespeare in Love and To Kill a Mockingbird, which are assumably highbrow but still palatable to the public, why can't they do it to all forms of high art?
Right, and the fact that they have to compete with mass media means those art forms are likely to change. So to the extent that Shakespeare is still considered valuable, we still have it. That's why it's still taught in schools, for example. That's why we force it, like we teach our kids, because we know that it teaches us the history of culture. But why is it benefit only on our side? No, thank you. How does TV stations actually work? Jim told you how we have Nielsen ratings, and that's how people necessarily demand what they want to watch. At the point when you force 50% of to get prime time, they want like half the day just to be like highbrow art and art house cinema, which very few people can actually relate to. What happens then is that the money that these TV stations actually make is significantly less because they have no advertising dollars, people don't actually watch it. What happens now is that it becomes background noise. It becomes something they either turn on as they eat dinner, or they turn off as they turn on, open their laptops, and watch Netflix instead. This means you get none of the benefits that you want on your side at the point when it becomes relegated to the thing that I put on in the background noise as I do more important things in my life. No, thank you. They wanted to tell us that, look, it's bad on our side because then we relegate it to this elitist sphere where no one else can access it. We've already told you how people can access it if they so choose, but we also tell you that it's worse on your side. It becomes far more elite and it becomes far more inaccessible at the point when it's relegated to the background noise that I don't want to watch. This means when the child comes home from school and tells his parents, hey, I can take an AP introductory like English class that teaches me about Shakespeare and all these things, their parents say, why do you want to learn that? That's useless. That's the thing I put on TV when I'm making dinner. Go learn something else that's far more fruitful. That's the sort of impression that people get at the point when you have it in the background. But lastly, they tell us, well, look, local creations, for example, of art house cinema, when they have to compete, they then tend to like whitewash themselves in order to compete. Let me tell you this: at the point when these TV stations, for example, do not have the funds, for example, nobody watches them anymore, the value of TV necessarily goes down as a result. They don't have the money to be able to fund art house cinema anymore. It means that nobody actually values these things. It means it's far more likely that they want to resort to those sort of metrics that you're saying in order to be able to attract any attention whatsoever. And we think that's far worse than the quality of the art house cinema and the high value entertainment that you want to provide to the world. On our side of the house, we're supremely proud to oppose.
Opposition.
We will be the first in this debate to analyze why are people actually not interested in high-end culture. Let us contextualize this debate, and I'll tell you why. CG will tell you why people are not interested, and there are a lot of inherent barriers that prevent people from being exposed to this form of high-end art because they're just inaccessible and non-palatable in the past. So let's look at this, right? High-end art has always been seen as exclusive to upper-tiers and restricted to only a privileged group of society, right? Therefore, under CG, we want to give more exposure to the common masses, and we think we can restrict and we can take away all these form of perceptual barriers that have been in place all this while, right? Now, let's look at the first reason, right? Because of the perception that we have imposed on common masses is this: they're just simply not sophisticated. They're not educated enough to understand the language of Shakespeare, to understand the language of Macbeth and King Lear. Therefore, we remove this inherent biasness against them, and we tell them that every single person in society can appreciate music and art as it is, right? So therefore, number one, they're not interested. Why exactly are they not interested, right? It's because they're not exposed to languages that are relatable to them and something that they can understand. Number two, they don't have any form of prior knowledge. Like what Ogo said, it is complicated, right? People don't understand. That means if you're not a literature student, if you don't study literature, or if you don't come from a privileged group of society, you don't have access to the story or the essence of Shakespeare stories, King Lear plays, and things like that, right? That means even if today media houses make a parody out of it or a modern remake of this literature, people still cannot fathom because people were never exposed to it in the first place, right? They don't have higher background and things like that, right? Number two, right? We tell you that now, because it has always been inaccessible in the past. For example, when Ogo wanted to say, oh, operas are there, people just don't go. Operas are not situated in developed areas or privileged areas. They're always situated in privileged areas. They're not situated in subdeveloped areas, right? Where the common masses can access operas and buy cheap tickets, right? They're always expensive and they're always for the patrons and always for the music program because it was always in this exclusive form of entertainment for these people. No, thank you, right? So when he said that, oh, we can teach it in school and things like that, right? But the purpose of learning that art is not when you go to school to only pass the examination, when you go to school to only pass the literature paper, you only learn Macbeth and you remember the lines as long as the paper has ended, you forget forget all of that. You don't understand it and you don't enjoy it as a student, right? No, thank you, right? So therefore, in order to access this sort of art, you must be a part of a club, like a Rotary Club or Interact Club. Everything is just inaccessible. All this stuff, right? All this while. So therefore, how do we make it more accessible? And why we think that media houses and have an imperative to do so, right? They make presentation of art more palatable to the public. What are we talking about? I'm talking about modification of art. That means you don't have so much inside jokes. You don't make the language so hard to understand and things like that. You make art relatable for people to comprehend and to appreciate it more. When I'm talking about, give you an example, like one that also people I read. Like Sherlock, it was a literature piece in the past, right? When Netflix turned into a TV series, right, it made it accessible to public, and the understanding of the essence of Shakespeare still remained in status quo. That's why people like me and Deborah subscribe and we watch Shakespeare. We love it and we enjoy it every Friday night. No, thank you. Shakespeare in Love, when Gwyneth Paltrow acted in the movie, is yes, it was a literature piece in the past. When she acted it, she brought life to the movie and made it more common to you and I to understand. It was like Romeo and Juliet, a contemporary movie that just a few years ago, The King and I, the remake of King and I, was also very palatable to the public. That means media houses have struck a balance in order to change certain the way it presents the movies, in order to also gain viewership and to not lose viewership, to also gain the revenue that people were so scared to engage with, right? No, thank you, right? So therefore, when things say people want to go back and chill with wine, people don't want to have things like that. But when media houses become more predictable and relatable to people will always have an incentive to opt into it, because we think that having more options is better for the diversification of art as a whole, right? So thank you. Now, number two, why is it so important that common masses have access? OJ just mentioned the word access, but we'll tell you why it's so entirely important the formulation of identity of a person. Like when you meet somebody in a social, like debates, social life, things like that, you ask the person, what's your likes and dislikes? What do you like to do? What's your hobby, right? Because it affects who you are. It forms a core identity of you. It tells people how you want to be portrayed in their eyes and how you want to be seen in their eyes. That means if you like jazz and wine, you're probably a person who reads poetry, a sentimental person in touch with your emotions and things like that, right? That means the more I have access to rich culture, is the more options I have to determine who I want to be and who I want to be seen in the eyes of another person and how I want to react in those circumstances, right? That means if I want to be seen as sophisticated and educated and just well informed about all types of art and culture, that I will opt into Sonata 18, Romeo and Juliet lines, I will look into Macbeth and King Lear scenes. This can only be done when you make it more accessible and you put it in prime time, because it has more coverage, it just reaches people more and people tune into that time, right? Therefore, we think it happens. Therefore, the comparison is this, right? Mass culture exists every single in everywhere, right? Like comic books, 9gag, social media, and even on the streets, right? People today are so overwhelmed with this form of art that they are no longer in touch with high-end art as a whole, right? That means we're telling you that high-end art should not be something snobbish and exclusive to only high-end people or privileged people, right? Because in the past, even though it was made by patrons and during the 1900s and things like that, but the outcome of those, the hymns we sing in church, Mozart and Beethoven are all pop cultures in those days that we see today, right? Therefore, we tell you that art is meant for the masses. They should not be restricted because the purpose of art as a whole is not celebrated. The purpose is lost. I'll take closing.
We're going to make a radical claim that television is no longer the primary form of entertainment for the people. So in a media environment where the TV is already struggling to keep its audiences, why will this move help the maintenance of the TV industry just as much as the high culture?
I told you already. When TV understands that there are some people in society who are not exposed to art, that they don't have access to this form of art, and if they can modify the art and make it more palatable to people, for people to opt into those art, for people to have an option to define who they are, to have a choice to be seen in that another person as how they want to be seen. We think media is like all the more reasons for them to be incentivized to have this form of art, especially when it grants them revenues and people opt into this, it increases their viewership and things like that. More importantly, what happens when people have the choice to determine how they want to be seen in the eyes of another and to formulate their identity? Number one, it's empowering, right? It's empowering because it tells people that just because I was born as a Chinese, I should not only be subscribed myself to Chinese identity. That means you escape the identity that people impose upon you. You escape the price-fitting effect of what people think you are. That means if I'm a Mexican person, I must dress up like I'm from the hood. If I'm a black person, I must always be in tune with rap and hip-hop and things like that. And now we take that away because as a middle class, I can tell you that I no longer just want to subscribe to 9gag and jokes that are not Shakespeare, but I want to be included into the trend of high-end culture and things like that, right? Number two, it tells people that culture and art should not only belong to the individual society, but it should belong to the masses. When we take away these inherent barriers, we can promote this in a political way to public as a whole. Very proud of the
Right, I think a number of volunteers
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk about two things in my debate. First, accessibility. Second, relatability. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I want to make a clarification first. Just like how you don't force people to become doctors and lawyers, you don't force people to appreciate art. As a theatre practitioner, I often produce shows and people often come and watch my shows. I have friends who come and watch. And then, after finish watching, my friends will tell me, Lisa, I'm really sorry, I enjoy your show, but I really don't understand what you're saying. And that's okay, I'll just explain to them. Because we see that you can make things accessible, but you cannot make things relatable if you're not going to teach them. So what I do is that I educate them. If you're just going to blindly put it on the TV without any education purpose, nobody is going to understand your high culture and you undermine the value of art. So high culture is considered high because it's niche and people often are unable to relate to it. Why? For example, Shakespeare. And it's often made up of languages that you need to translate it. It's made up of like old cultures or like old English that people don't has no thank you everybody, that people has no idea what is it exactly. So you need to explain to them. And if you put it on TV, you are not, as the people are obviously not going to get it, right? And just like if you talk about the whole issue about accessibility, right? Just like how soccer is so accessible, there are so many people out there who are still not watching soccer. Why? Because they are not interested. No? So if they are not interested, they are not going to watch the TV. Just because you put it during the prime time doesn't mean people are going to watch it. If people are not interested, people, what do? You turn off the TV, you go YouTube, you go Spotify. Okay, so two rebuttals I'm going to talk about today. Firstly, on the intervention of state, and secondly, on this whole issue of relatability. So thank you everybody. Okay, firstly, on the issue of intervention of state, right? We want to say that the state has no rights to intervene, and government intervention, right, isn't necessary. And even if government intervention is necessary, right, it is a very bad choice. Why? Because you don't achieve your goals. Because why? I already told you that people will just go to YouTube, people will just go to Spotify. Nobody will watch your TV. Secondly, right, you don't achieve your whole issue of like this high culture. Because often, like, no thank you, of like your Shakespeare and everything, right, people don't understand. Why? Okay, let me explain to you in this very simple manner that government don't even have any intimate knowledge of what the media does. I mean, obviously, as a government, you run the country, you don't run the media industry, right? Obviously, you have no idea what is the backstory of the media. You have no idea what happens at the back seat. And obviously, you are then not the right person to be in charge of this thing because you don't understand anything at all. Okay, moving on to my next rebuttal of like this whole issue of relatability, right? They talk about both opening and closing. Closing more. They talk about this whole issue of like relatability. Okay, no thank you. They want to make high culture, high art, right, good on TV. But what does this show? If you want to make high art good on TV, what they say, right? They say they are going to make like having like easier English. They are going to put some jokes inside whatever. No, I'm going to tell you no. As a theatre practitioner, I'm going to tell you seriously no. You don't undermine the art like this. Because right, the minute you're going to put in simple English, you undermine the value of art. You take away the value of high culture. The reason why like Shakespeare all this are so like of so-called high culture is because we have all this kind of like English that people don't understand. Yeah, obviously because people don't relate to it, that's why it's high, it's not relatable. And if you're going to make it simpler, right, firstly you're going to undermine whatever that's going to happen, and you're going to undermine this whole value. And then right, so what do you do in the end? What you do at the end of the day is you make it accessible, you make it relatable, but you undermine the value of the art. And is that what you want to achieve? Obviously no, right? So I'm going to tell you on our side then, how then do we attain value of the art. Firstly, I'm going to tell you that it is already very accessible. Art is very accessible. I'll talk about it more in my extension. Before I even go on to my extension opening.
Okay, let's ignore the knife that Sharon gave you. I told you that when you screen high on TV, you have a higher chance that people consume it. Lucas told you that you are able to you're able to use the power of the television competitions to hype it up the same way you hype Justin Bieber and James Bond differently.
Okay, thank you. Very simple. I told you already, if you are not interested, you will just turn off the TV. You will not watch it. I told you already, right? If you're on the TV now and you saw like some soccer and you're not interested in soccer, what you do? You turn off the TV, you go and eat, you go and sleep. You will just not watch the TV. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you about this whole issue of like TV is no longer the primary form of entertainment. What is prime time entertainment? Prime time entertainment is the time that most number of people are watching TV. So let's talk about this. Okay, who are the people that are watching TV then? I give you two kinds. Okay, who are the target audience that you are trying to reach out to? I give you two kinds of people. Firstly is your young students. Secondly is the middle-aged people, your housewife, your retirees, your grandparents, ama, ato, okay? So right, on your issue of like young people, right, we see that number one, young people, okay, wait, let me do, okay, I tell you like on research, right, the prime time entertainment, no thank you, I've already taken you. The prime timing, right, is 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. During this period, right, students are either studying, sleeping, or anything, but students will not be watching TV. And even if students are watching, right, they are also not watching TV, they are watching YouTube, they are watching Spotify. Very simple. Okay, on the other note, no thank you. On the other note, right, if you talk about your housewife, etc., very good. Why they watch TV? Because they come home from work, they're very tired already, right? They turn on the TV because they want to watch something that can relax themselves, they want to watch a comedy. If you are going to turn on something that like Shakespeare, whatever, then they talk all the ancient English that nobody understands. Do you think they want to watch? They would rather sleep, right? I mean, who wants to watch something that you don't understand? That's why I told you already. Very simple. They will just turn off the TV. You are not going to achieve what you want to achieve. Okay? And so, so I'm going to tell you about this thing about as a state, right? You not only have to protect high culture, but you also need to protect the other of your media industry. What closing government is trying to do, but when they try to attempt to protect their high culture, right, you are going to affect your media industry. So, what as a person, right, as a government, what we want to do is we want to achieve both then. Because we already see that it's very accessible. It's very accessible like in schools where like you have learning journeys towards like for the students, we have social studies, we have like all the kind of like racial harmony day, international friendship day to teach them all about this thing. If you want to talk about adults also have learning journeys. I don't know what I call that, like adult journeys or whatsoever. To go to like museum to watch or whatsoever, right? Yes. Okay, so what is then the problem? The problem is that it is not relatable. So how then do we make it relatable? Nobody here obviously read the ACSR by the National Council on like promoting arts in 2025. Nobody read it, I read it, I tell you what you are going to do. We are going to do two things there. Firstly, we are going to put more money into the Arts Council. Secondly, we are going to put more money towards school and community arts. Because community art is now so accessible, right? So what have we achieved? I tell you, we have already achieved the accessibility part. We have also achieved the relatability part because we tell you that we are going to entertain them, we are going to teach them, we are going to do post-show talk to explain to them what is Shakespeare, etc. And not on TV where like you have no post-show dialogue, no communication at all, and people will never understand. And it's for all of these reasons, I'm so proud to propose.
Alright, thank a member of the opposition. Let us invite
So I found it problematic that no one said people need to be properly educated to appreciate the true essence of Batman and Superman. But you need to be educated to appreciate what Shakespeare and what Hamlet is about. We think that is a fundamental perception that CG seeks to change. I'll talk about two issues. I'll talk about people's choice. I'll talk about the market. But secondly, I'll talk about art. What's the true essence of it? What's the importance in playing into the identity formation of individuals? And we think why that's a particularly important part of this debate. First, choice and market. So when we talk about roles of state, we think usually, and we think it's in this case as well, that states should always seek to maximize the choice that people have. And this goes directly against what what the opposition bench is trying to tell you. They accuse us of imposing on people, of taking away the choice of people and media outlets. Why is that not true? Firstly, because it was considered that if you don't like the show, you shut it off entirely, so there's no element of force. So all that argument from Ogo that says you should allow people to decide for entirely sit down. Secondly, it's not true that the government have absolutely no authority in deciding what goes onto the TV, because what that is the censorship board for. Those are the institutions that we set up, that we trust to evaluate what is palatable, what's okay for society to watch. But also, I need to debunk this idea that Hannibal or like House of Cards went on TV because there was a popular poll of, hey, what do you guys want to watch? Let's produce what people want to watch. That's not true. Reality is, what people like on the ground are usually directed and spearheaded by these media outlets. They start something first, and then everyone's like, oh, Orange is New Black is so cool, I'm gonna start watching that. So that's the plan that we seek to create. No, thank you. So for example, right, like just I think about 10 years ago, then like media outlets decided that crime and investigation is a cool thing. Then we had like a whole slew of like CSI and CIS and all these things that goes on. Then like currently we have a new trend of like, we want to look at like ethnic comedy. So there are things like Empire and Fresh Off the Boat. So these trends were never dictated by the people. They were always directed by media houses, and that's what we will see. But usually they go like what media houses do is that they seek new niche and new like options and new waters that previously have not been charted. And we think high art is exactly the place that media outlets can capitalize in this situation. And why do we think media outlets and production houses of all people are the best position to do this job? We think they are the experts in making things palatable and popular. And this is why I engage. When you look at movies such as Shakespeare Love, Phantom of the Opera, To Kill a Mockingbird, which still preserve the true essence and value and the lessons that we learn from all these literature, yet make it palatable to the public. We think they are very good at doing this, right? So when they question us, if you make it like popular, no thank you, if you make it accessible to the public, doesn't that compromise the quality of this literature? We don't think that's true, because essentially when you make languages simpler, languages are merely carriers of what those literature are truly about. When you want To Kill a Mockingbird, regardless of the language, you still learn values such as justice should be given to people regardless of all races. When Beethoven and Mozart music back in those days were played in the churches because they were meant for the public to enjoy. And we think that is the true spirit of art and what it really should be about. That's why art and museum who have Mona Lisa should be open to the public, because art belongs to the public and we should make it accessible to the public, right? So the fundamental perception change that we want to seek to change is that it's wrong to assume that the masses will not be able to comprehend, will not be able to appreciate high art just because we don't show it to them. Before I move on,
Under your side, what would be the incentive for Sherlock to be modernized and relatable if you don't have to compete and will always survive because the government protects them?
No, because even if with a 50% quota, there will be a lot of TV shows competing for that prime time, right? Because you still make like the market still functions, even if you impose a quota. But secondly, I want to talk about the idea of art and but before that, a short rebuttal of like what Neha pointed out in her UI. She said like TV is already increasingly unpopular, so you cannot raise their revenue generation. But this is like about like just media outlets production in general. So like when people who don't watch TV, they turn to Netflix, they turn to like NBC, like these online streaming services. We think it's about those as well. So like it's okay if people don't watch TV anymore, because like if that's the general trend, we can't change anything, right? So let's talk about art, the true essence of it. Art, like Christian said, yeah, sure.
Primetime TV is just as important to protect as high culture. Why is it okay to let one industry die and survive the other?
That assumes that because of high art, then prime time will die. That assumes that the general masses will never be able to appreciate Shakespeare and love. But if you look into history and one of the facts, it's simply on our side. Let's look at art identity formation. Okay, this is where we have to look at the even if argument, because like debaters have to do that. So, what are the principles of art? It's a common commodity, like what I told you about just now, right? But more importantly, it creates it enables people and empowers people to form identities as they are. When we are born into birth lotteries, and some people want it and some people lose it. If I'm born into an upper class white family, I have access to Shakespeare, and I go go out to people and say, I enjoy wine and jazz and Shakespeare because I'm a sophisticated person, like that choice of forming that identity is not available to the general public right now. What do we make? What do we change in CG? We make culture and these avenues of art and literature just like commodity, just like the bags and the clothes that you can choose to wear on you to show who you are. We think that's good when people can choose what they want to be perceived as. And that's good because not only that people can choose to counter the birth lottery, we can escape the paradigm that the middle class will only able to enjoy things such as 9gag and things such as TV shows on Netflix. We think the public is much more intelligent than that. So it's okay for us to give out these options in enabling people to form these identities. But ultimately, it is also important to look at art as what they are really meant to be. Throughout history, it has always been meant to serve the masses. The inspiration are drawn from the masses, from the views around us, from the people and the behaviors around us. It's wrong for us and wrong for the commercial world to just restrict them and think that people cannot understand them. We want to change that. We're very proud.
Apparently the videos was very open.
Arguments about why high art is important for everyone without telling us why the mechanism of primetime TV achieves those things. So we're going to do a couple of things. One, we're going to talk about government end goals and why what we do in opposition is far better for that. Two, we're going to look at the concept of high culture and high art and why we think high culture is something that's more palatable on our side rather than what they want to achieve. So let's make some things very clear. We should make high art accessible for everyone and not just the privileged. No shit. We should make sure our cultural industries don't die out. No shit. We agree on opposition that these are things that should happen. The problem is, primetime television doesn't get you those things. Primetime television doesn't ensure that individuals learn and get informed about high art. Primetime TV also doesn't allow for you to understand and want to ensure engage yourselves in this high art even more. Phyllis told you that when she told you that high art is something that needs interpretation, something that needs education and guidance. And you just, the only response we got from Deborah is to say, well, you don't need education for Batman and Superman, why do you need it for Shakespeare? Here's why. Because Shakespeare is in ancient English that you need to translate to modern English. That's why you need to be able to get some sort of help in getting to understand the context. Because Shakespeare is built in a community and culture that doesn't exist in modern society. So you need to understand the historical context behind Shakespeare before you understand why the story evolved the way it did. That's very different from Batman and Superman, which is built in a fantastical world, but still within modern contemporary context that you and I live in on a daily basis. So it's a lot easier to relate to Batman and Superman than Shakespeare, and you need more help with Shakespeare. The argument they're going to run is, the argument that they're trying to run was, well, you know what, you can get that by making it more palatable, by ensuring people like Gwyneth Paltrow play Shakespeare roles in modern English so that you get that. Hi, that takes away all the nuances of the community and culture and history of the art because you set it within a modern context. The disgusting portrayal of Romeo and Juliet that was set in the Bronx in New York makes absolutely no sense in actually portraying the stories of Romeo and Juliet. What does happen then is that individuals who watch that portrayal aren't going to suddenly get interested in Shakespeare. They're just going to like that variation of Shakespeare, which does not make them interested in high art and the actual values of culture. It just gets them interested in the modern portrayals of high art and high culture, which doesn't get the benefits they want to achieve on that side. If the argument is that high culture can be made popular and more palatable and something that everyone will want to watch and therefore doesn't hurt anything else, then that's an incentive for media outlets to do it on their own. They will have these things added to their timelines because it will get them revenues and ratings because it's palatable and something that people will like. As long as that's not something that media outlets do on their own because they realize they don't get the ratings for it, that means that these items are not something that are easily palatable and relatable for these people. So no, we don't think it's easy to just go, let's just make it more palatable, bam, things happen. That's not how this works, right? If you want to get high art and high culture to become popular in society, the way to do that isn't to dumb it down and simplify it, but to actually have individuals be able to appreciate it in its original form. That's why we told you how we protect high art on our side, right? Whether it is things like what the National Arts Council plan is right now, to be able to increase state funding for these art programs in these niche canons, whether it is to increase live shows in the developing areas that CG claims doesn't exist in status quo. Fine, create those on our side, right? Be able to have your operas and your stage shows in these developing areas. Decrease the prices, make it free for these shows so that these individuals can go. Have mandatory lessons in school so that these children can decide if they like it and create informed choices for it. We need all of these mechanisms. Ensure that you keep this industry alive and keep these individuals and those people who are so-called less educated to also be interested in these things. You don't need prime time TV before we go on.
Why are all of Phyllis's extensions, not your new material, not mutually exclusive with ours? Because ours gives the people who learn about lit in school a living learning life to engage with in TV. You don't have any end state.
Look, we don't think that TV is necessary for the end goals they want to achieve. We think that as long as you agree that all of our mechanisms can happen on your side, that all the benefits also exist on our side without the primetime TV mandate. We think that the mandate to have 50% quota on primetime TV does not get you the benefits you want to achieve if you accept that our policy achieves that too. Let's look at why primetime TV slots are so dangerous for this, right? Because here's a strange argument from Deborah, right? That let's let TV die. We agree with us that with the POI idea that TV is dying. So let's let TV die, and in the time that it doesn't die, let's create this policy that creates change. I'm sorry, you can't have it both ways. You can't both say TV is so influential that you create some sort of change in society and create information, yet at the same time admit that the TV is dying and no one's watching it anyway, and you don't get the benefits that you want to, you don't care for the TV dying. If the TV industry really is dying and people don't watch it as much, then the benefits that you want to achieve doesn't happen because no one watches TV. Let's look at why we think it's important to save the TV industry, right? We think traditional media in its form is already dying. And the main reason for that is because there's a diverse amount of other things that people can do. Something that OG admitted at the start, right? The individuals who choose to go to YouTube, will choose to go to Spotify, will choose to go to all these other elements apart from TV. This means that if you give them something that they don't immediately like, they will switch off the TV and they will move on to something else. This means low ratings for television, and this means that television isn't able to make sure it's profitable. And this is important because it's not just any other time slot. You're using the one time slot that TV industries use for revenue, right? It's prime time TV. It's the very slot that's used for making sure that the industry stays profitable. What you're doing is you're saying, let's use this very time slot and make sure they make no profit because we're happy with ratings going down. We think if that is the case, you shut down one entire industry in order to so-called prioritize another industry. We think that unfair prioritization is a state when you say that one form of media or one form of art is more important than the other. Because we think mainstream art, mainstream popular culture is just as important and just as difficult to preserve without television, because television is your mainstay traditional media. We think at the end of the day, that form of television, the form of television as it is today, should continue to thrive and should continue to exist in order to be able to give entertainment to people, in order for them to self-actualize and other nice things that opening opposition talked about. We think that in the form of culture as it is, television should exist and should be allowed to be balanced with high culture in a way where the state can manage both of these industries successfully rather than prioritizing one of these industries over the other vehicles.
Thank you, everyone.